This is part 2 of Adeila, written by Huff. Friends, family, and strangers. Mom and Dad stood strong, but not without help from family, friends, and many other people whom they've never met. Individuals as well as charities stepped in to help our family as they helped other families in the 1950s. Much like people stepping forward in today's world to help with the tragedy of Katrina. These people and organizations are definitely deserving of recognition. My story might have a different ending if it not for the aid of the March of Dimes and the American Red Cross. These organizations saved my family by giving relief in a multitude of ways. By the unselfish acts of many, my parents could focus on healing not only for Adeila, but for themselves as well. The stress from the burdens of illness, a new baby, and huge debt from medical care could have torn our family apart. However, through support from our extended family network, aid from the American Red Cross and the March of Dimes, and the solid marriage of my parents, my family found the strength to stay united. I have worked for the American Red Cross Blood Services for the past 11 years. I've heard many testimonials from people whose lives were saved due to the efforts of the Red Cross. I know firsthand the good done by this organization. I have lived it, and I have seen it, personally and professionally. I have a great respect for the American Red Cross organization and the aid they provide worldwide. The March of Dimes is another organization to recognize not only for contributions given to my sister and parents, but also for the contributions given to hundreds of families that needed their support during the polio epidemic. These organizations played a vital role in our history, especially during the polio crisis. Today, they continue to offer help and support to families all over the world for a diverse number of reasons. I salute these organizations for their humanitarian work. I mentioned earlier that my dad worked 2 jobs. He worked the night shift of the Burlington, Iowa Railroad, then the day shift for the Simpson-Paulson Lumber Company. Both of these businesses were supportive of the time Dad needed to give to his family during the initial crisis of Adelia's illness and my birth. They knew that Dad would never take advantage. Dad was a very hard-working, honest man who believed in 8 hours of work for 8 hours of pay. He was not a slacker. He gave 100%. Because of Dad's integrity, his bosses allowed him the time he needed along with the reassurance that his jobs would be waiting for him when he was able to return. One individual in particular stands out for the support and friendship given to my parents. Warren Whitsitt is that individual. Warren was the owner and operator of the Simpson-Paulson Lumber Company. Warren was not only my dad's boss, he was my dad's friend. He was instrumental in helping our family. Warren organized fundraisers to help with the mounting expenses from Adelia's long stay in the hospital. Mom told me that Warren and his wife, Mary Ellen, purchased books and magazines for Adeila that would help her pass the time as she lay in her iron lung. The day Adeila came home, Warren gave her a record player and some of Elvis' records. These records gave Adeila endless hours of pleasure. Dad liked to joke that Adeila played the records so much she wore a hole in them. Not only did Warren help by offering material things, but he also gave a helping hand when there was an emergency. He was on call, so to speak, and in the event of Adeila becoming ill in the night, one phone call brought Warren to our home, regardless of the hour. He would stay with Peggy and me until Mom or Dad returned home from the hospital. Sometimes Warren would bundle us into his car, packing us off to his home for the remaining hours of the night. If it turned out that Adeila was going to be kept in the hospital for several days, Peggy and I would then go to Grandma and Grandpa Groff's, or most likely to Aunt Maud and Uncle Carol's. Regardless, with the considerable distance that separated our home from the homes of our extended family. It was a great comfort for Mom and Dad to know that Warren lived nearby and would come when needed. Warren came to visit often in the years that followed. As young children, Peggy and I would ask to go home with Warren to stay overnight. It was a treat when Mom and Dad allowed us to do so. Warren's support continued over many, many years, never wavering. I know that my parents had an overwhelming sense of gratitude toward Warren. Dad and Warren remained friends for the rest of their lives. Dad remained a devoted employee working for Warren for many years following Adelia's illness. What about Carol? Dad spent most of his time at St. Francis Hospital with Adelia. In a matter of days, Graham Hospital dismissed Mom and me. Grandma Adelia and Aunt Maud, Mom's mother and sister, fussed over us for the moment we stepped through the door. As soon as Mom had recuperated from childbirth, she too spent as much time as possible at St. Francis Hospital with Dad and Adelia. With much of Mom and Dad's time spent at the hospital taking them away from home for countless hours at a time, home for me became that of my grandparents and aunt. Although I spent time at home with my parents in the first 5 years of my life, I have few memories of those times. Most of my memories are from time spent on the farm with Aunt Maud and Uncle Carol. These are wonderful memories, for I loved my aunt and uncle dearly. Mom and Dad gave me the gift of my uncle's name, which I carry with great pride. I passed Uncle Carol's name on to my youngest son, whom we called Brady to avoid confusion in the household with two Carols. I suppose some people would be bitter. Some might even suffer emotional scars for lack of attention from their parents, when in fact, I feel just the opposite. My aunt and uncle had no children of their own. Therefore, they took me into their home, giving me the attention that any child would receive from their parents. In fact, I thought of my aunt and uncle as my second parents. I loved spending time with them on their farm, whether it was gathering eggs, shucking corn, planting gardens, picking flowers, milking cows, playing in the swimming hole, picking blackberries, or churning butter. I loved spending time with my Aunt Maud, but my ultimate fun thing to do on the farm was helping my Uncle Carol with his coon dogs. Here's a close-up picture of Uncle Carol and Black Demon, his prize hound. Uncle Carol raised racing field trial dogs. These dogs required training, grooming, exercising, plus a special diet that required daily food preparation. I worked hard helping with the dogs. However, I did not mind because I loved the dogs and I totally adored my Uncle Carol. I have millions of memories of times on the farm. These are just a few of my favorites. Deprived of attention? I think not. I relished in attention. Mom and Dad had a lot to cope with at that particular time in our lives. Knowing that a loving environment I was living in with my aunt and uncle gave my parents the peace of mind they needed in order to take care of Adelia's life-threatening needs. Besides, it was not as if I never saw Mom and Dad, or that this arrangement had any permanency. Once Adelia stabilized, Mom and Dad were able to spend more time at home, allowing me to have their attention. This made the need for me to stay with my aunt and uncle necessary only when Mom and Dad were required at the hospital. But until that time came, my parents spent as much time with me as they possibly could, taking me home for nights whenever time allowed. I had a very happy childhood. In fact, I had the better of two worlds. How could I have anything other than a happy childhood with loving parents, nurturing grandparents, and an aunt and uncle that loved me as if I was their own child? Truthfully, every adult who touched my life fawned over me to the point that I was overindulged. Of one thing I am sure, many people, including my parents, loved me. This love molded me into the self-assured, happy person I became. I attribute my assuredness partly to the fact that the adults that surrounded me treated me in the adult fashion. The adults surrounding me gave as much information as a child of my age would be able to understand. Information such as what was happening with the members of my family or where they were going for the day. For instance, if Mom, Dad, Aunt Maud, or Uncle Carol were leaving, they told me where they were going, when they would return and allowed me a voice in where I would stay the night, assuming a stayover would be necessary. Most importantly, I never had the feeling of abandonment, since the people whom I loved made sure they either called home or returned by the time they had told me. My self-assuredness developed from the sense of security given to me by my family and in the knowledge that they would never leave me. For a child to become self-assured adult, developing a strong feeling of security is singularly the most important aspect of child rearing a parent can give to their child. I strongly believe a child would develop self-assurance when living in a secure environment surrounded with love and dependability, as well as the close relationships between my family members and me. The adults in my life made sure that I built a relationship with Adeila, even if it was from a distance. Since it was unknown how polio spread from one person to another, visitors for polio patients were limited. Unfortunately for Adeila, allowing babies to visit polio wings of the hospital was out of the question. One thing Adeila longed for was to see the baby sister she had waited 9 long months to see. Since this meeting was not possible, Adeila and I developed our relationship using other methods of communication. Grandma and Aunt Maud wrote lots of letters to Adeila, and when I was older, naturally, I wrote her letters too. I drew and colored pictures for Adeila. I made her cookies and a pretty mobile to hang over her iron lung. I spent hours making her lots of silly things like yarn necklaces and bracelets. I even made things for the other children in Adelia's ward with whom she had become friends. Adeila and I got to know each other visually through photographs. Mom and Dad brought me pictures of my big sister and vice versa. They took photos of me, which were given to Adeila. These activities allowed Adeila and me to interact. These tools made us a part of each other's life. Two sisters acquainted from a distance, not to meet face to face for several years. My parents worked hard at making sure I knew about Adeila too. They would explain things that happened to Adeila, what she did, said, and wanted. They knew it was important for me to realize her limitations as well as be aware for her special needs. It was vital for me to have as much information as I could absorb in order to have a connection to my sister. Pictures, letters, and verbally delivered messages were the tools used to build the deep love between two sisters who could not meet. Two sisters who would meet 5 years later, their desire to be together growing stronger with each passing year until finally the day of their meeting arrived. In the next video, we will be reading the first meeting, so stay tuned.